Chairman, we're live. Thank you.
Good morning. And welcome to East Devon District Council's virtual licensing and enforcement meeting on the 27th of July 2020. I'm your chairman, Councillor Joe Wibley. I'd also like to welcome anybody watching the meeting via the live stream. All participants here today are taking part remotely, and as well as being live streamed, the meeting is being recorded. So please bear this in mind throughout, and may I remind you to be careful with your language. May I also remind members that code of conduct applies throughout this meeting. We also reserve the right to remove and disconnect any participant who is disrupting the meeting by whatever means. Please turn any telephone devices off or to silent, he says, doing the same himself. As this licensing and enforcement committee meeting is dependent on the internet connection and power supply, in the event of a break in the internet connection or power cut, please bear with us as we try to reconnect. After 15 minutes, if we're not able to reconnect, we'll consider the meeting adjourned and reconvene one at a later date. Please check the committee page on our website for details. Please make sure all microphones are muted when you're not speaking to avoid any background noise levels. Keep points short and do not repeat points that have already been made. And do not interrupt. If you wish to comment, please raise your electronic blue hand and wait to be called. All councillors have been sent the agenda for today's meeting, and any members of the public who wish to view the agenda can do so by visiting our website www.eastdevon.gov.uk. I think this is the part where I'm supposed to tell you where the fire exits are, but that doesn't apply today. We will now start the meeting by doing a roll call of committee members here present. Can you please unmute your microphone, and when you hear your name, please confirm by saying present. When you have confirmed you're present, please mute your microphone again.
Councillor Wibley.
Present.
Councillor Wibley.
Present.
Councillor Bloxton.
Present.
Councillor Cahill.
Present.
Councillor Chapman.
Present.
Councillor Dent.
Present.
Councillor Gazzard. Councillor Gazzard. Councillor Cookway.
Present.
Councillor Jarvis.
Present.
Councillor Jackson. Councillor Jackson. Councillor Jeffrey.
Present.
Councillor Pepper. Councillor Pepper. Councillor Pratt.
Present.
Councillor Taylor.
Present.
Councillor Taylor.
Present.
Councillor Tom Wright.
Present.
Councillor Woodward.
Present.
So I assume, Henry, we are quorum.
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Excellent. Okay, so we move to agenda item 1, public speaking. I believe there are no public speakers today. Is that correct?
Yes, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. So agenda item 2, the minutes of the previous meeting. If anyone has a comment on the set of minutes from the 12th of February 2020, could you make your comment by raising your blue hand? And if I have no blue hands raised, I'll take this as an indication that you all agree the minutes of the previous meeting. Looking for blue hands, no blue hands. Okay, thank you. The minutes of the previous meeting are agreed. Agenda item 3, do we have any apologies, Chris?
I haven't received any, no, Chairman.
Okay. Agenda item 4, declarations of interest. So I believe that's you again, Chris.
Chairman, I'm going to take that one. It's
Okay.
Sarah here.
Hi, Sarah.
Thank you. Declarations of interest. Councillor Bloxham,
None.
Councillor Cahill,
None.
Councillor Cahill.
None.
Thank you. Councillor Chapman,
None.
Councillor Dent,
None.
Councillor Gazzard, Councillor Gazzard.
He's not here, I don't think.
Oh, apologies.
That's
Councillor Hookway,
None, thank you.
Councillor Jackson. Don't think he's here either.
No.
Thank you. Councillor Jeffrey,
None.
Councillor Pepper,
Not here either, Sarah.
also not here. Thank you. Councillor Pratt,
None.
Councillor Taylor, Councillor Taylor, any declarations?
None.
Thank you. Councillor Wibley,
None.
Councillor Woodward,
None.
and Councillor Tom Wright.
None, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we move to agenda item 5, matters of urgency, and I believe there are none. Agenda item 6 is any confidential or exempt items, and I believe there are no confidential or exempt items which officers recommend should be dealt with this way. So, agenda item 7, what we're all here for, pavement licenses to do with the new Business and Planning Act 2020. Before Henry presents his report, I'd just like to thank Henry and all of his team, all of the licensing team, and also Strata for the work they've done in readying things for this to be implemented as soon as it can be. They put in a great deal of work in a very short space of time, and I'd like our thanks to go on record for that. So, Henry, if you'd like to present your report.
Thank you, Chair. I should also add in a couple of the legal team as well, Nita and Giles as well into that.
Thank you
So
very
thank you, yes, because I was going to echo your thanks. And thank you, committee, for giving up your Monday morning to be here. This is something that has come in and come through very quickly. We had envisaged it being a matter for Cabinet, and some of you will have been at Cabinet last week where this was considered. Unfortunately, a late change through the Lords meant that the Act precluded this from being a Cabinet decision, and our constitution therefore necessitates it coming to licensing and enforcement. So I appreciate you being here early morning on Monday to enable us to get it in place, all being well. So what this matter relates to is the use of highway land, or certain highway land, for putting out furniture in connection with food and drink businesses. A lot of continental references have been made, but if you're sitting out and drinking, then generally speaking, if it's in the highway, you're going to have one of these licenses to do it. What the Act does is it transfers the responsibility for this, which currently, or at least did, sit with Devon County Council, to us, and that is in response to the COVID pressures that the county are facing. But it's also, in general terms, to help the COVID response for businesses, in that it now presents a truncated timescale for dealing with the matter. It was 28 days at county, and now it's 14. It's a reduced fee to apply for this. It was, I think it was 200 or 280, and it's now a maximum fee of £100. In terms of the 14 days that we have to determine a licence, 7 days of those are put over to consultation, and the remaining 7 days are then for consideration, writing reports, and actually taking the decision. If we don't take a decision within the 14 days, then this is a deemed grant, and that means the applicant gets it as of right. So there are some consequences for that. The conditions that will apply to the grants will be published on our website, so we need to agree those, because they will apply to any grant we give, and also any deemed grant there may be. We can also add extra conditions if we feel they're appropriate, which you couldn't do on a deemed grant. The other implication of not making a decision within the 14 days is that a licence is then deemed granted for a year's period, or up to the 31st of September 2021, whichever is the, I knew I was going to get myself into trouble, whichever is the earlier. So other than that, if it's a grant that we are making, we can impose the time frame, and we are recommending initially that they are for a 6-month period, and that is so that we can assess the implications of this, because it's obviously all new to us, and make sure that on any renewal there may be next year, that we are aware of what's going on, the impact of these licenses and the sort of totality or accumulation effect that there may be over the grant. The other aspect is the local conditions. The national legislation covers 2 specific elements that have to be taken into account. One is to do with not obstructing the highway, and then the other is to do with making sure that there is smoke-free that there is smoke-free seating in a nightside area. And I'll come back to both of those. The other thing that we are required to do is to make sure that we have regard to the access for disabled persons. There's national guidance on that, which we must take into account when we are making a decision, and that is also referenced in the local conditions as well. The implications for this regime for us, I mean, obviously it's relatively unknown because it's new for us. The county have seen a spike in applications as a consequence of the COVID, the relaxations and the return to business. So we can expect probably a similar amount of, an increase in work, if you like. So in that sense, I'm asking for extra resourcing to help cover the increased work that my licensing team, the council's licensing team, will suffer. It's expected that that will be recovered by or covered by the fee that I would hope we will charge at £100. And then the recommendations also cover a series of delegations just to make sure that we can determine it in quick time rather than having to go to committees because of this 14-day turnaround, and also just to make minor adjustments or tweaks to the scheme in the event that it is deemed necessary as we start to implement, because of course, as I say, it is new. I also touched, of course, that Cabinet did make a recommendation to licensing and enforcement to adopt this pretty much as written. You will recall it was expressed in the alternative in the event that it was a Cabinet function, but it wasn't. So Cabinet have recommended to licensing and enforcement that you adopt. There's been a couple of minor tweaks, and I'll just come back to the local conditions now, which essentially cover those off. The 2 main changes really relate to smoking. As the conditions have been originally written, it was to be no smoking in the outside area. Now, the government accepted the House of Lords amendment to effectively have the national condition requiring no smoking outdoors, in the outdoor area. Now, the committee can still impose a no smoking requirement if they like, but I think the government's intent was to reflect that there will be some premises that have invested quite heavily in facilitating outdoor smoking, and for those it would be unreasonable then to stop them from doing it. So the suggestion is that you have a condition that advises applicants that we would like it to be no smoking if possible, but if not, then they must adhere to the government's guidance on having the smoke-free seating areas and comply with the requirements in that regard. And then the other one is the no obstruction condition, which, as I say in the report, effectively covers off the situation in that the conditions require the highway to be kept free and unobstructed. The only final bit in the local conditions that you may wish to consider is this issue of the utensils or the drinking ware that you can use outside. Preferably, we would rather it was a polycarbonate stroke plastic for safety reasons, and obviously glasses going walking, particularly being, if you think of the Strand, being left in the Strand or out onto the beach. So preferably we would rather have that, but of course the council has signed up to the single-use plastic, or not having single-use plastics motion that went through council. So you just need to bear that in mind as we go forward, but obviously that's for debate and for the council to determine. So other than that, Chair, I think that probably covers off the mainstay of it. I'm obviously happy to take any questions there may be, and hand it back to you.
Okay, thank you. First of all, we'll open it up to any non-committee members. I did see a couple. Is there anybody from outside of the committee who would like to speak? Okay, from outside of the committee, we have Councillor Paul Miller.
Right, thank you, Chair. Welcome to your place as chairing this committee, and thanks for Henry. thanks to Henry for turning this report around so quickly, especially late in the day, with the amendments coming through from the House of Lords, which means that the committee has to meet this morning. My question is really on what happens when you get an objection within this 14-day period. What happens after that? Is it that the licensing subcommittee meets and the decision of the subcommittee is final, or would there be further consideration after that meeting, or a further consultation with the police and other consultees? I just want a bit of clarity on that.
Henry?
Yeah, certainly, Chair. So at the moment, there is no intention for this to be going to the subcommittee, and partly because of the timing issues that come into play. So on the timeline we've got the 7-day initial consultation period, and once that closes, and bear in mind there could be quite a few, you'll see from the report there are quite a few consultees involved. At that point, we've then got the 7 days to consider those, deal with them, and write the report and get the decision issued. So there isn't an intent to go to the subcommittee for this. As far as resolving them, obviously it depends what they are, but it will be down to the sort of experience of the licensing officers in determining whether it's acceptable or not. The mainstay, of course, that we would expect is this issue of well, firstly, public safety, but secondly, the sort of the crime and disorder aspect, if you like, of having the outdoor drinking. And so the police will be paramount in being able to advise whether they consider it acceptable or not. But the officers will have regard to all of the consultations that come in and try and deal with them appropriately. There may be scope for some negotiation and sort of imposition of further conditions to resolve concerns, but fundamentally, officers will have to take a decision at the end of the day whether they consider it's acceptable for the use to go ahead in light of the concerns and the consultation responses they may have received.
Okay, cheers, Henry. Is there anybody else from outside of the committee who wishes to speak? It doesn't appear so. So now we'll move this inside the committee. And first up is Councillor Tom Wright.
Thank you, Chairman. I think the document written and the guidance is very explicit, but my concern is how can we control what is outside the, if you like, the designated area? My concern, as we've seen it on many television clips, of sort of uncontrolled drinking in the streets where social distancing isn't enforced. And I'm wondering, can we impose a condition that any alcohol supplied must stay within the area, the designated area for consumption? What we don't want is people having their beer, getting up, walking outside the area perhaps so they can smoke, or even transferring beer to outside. So the outside area becomes an uncontrolled drinking area with no social distancing and no way of controlling it. That is my one concern. I welcome it, otherwise it does seem very controlled. And with regard to smoking, again, that is a problem for premises that don't have beer gardens. There's a lot of premises who've got, I know in Budley, have got well designated smoking areas within their premises, but those don't apply to those smaller premises. For example, in Exmouth, the great little pub in Bicton Street, the Bicton Arms, there is no outside area for people to smoke, and on busy nights now, that footpath is heavily congregated and to some extent obstructed by smoke. So I think we should be able to bring in something which actually puts on the licensee some responsibility for ensuring that the drinking stays within the designated areas and he doesn't allow it just to overspill into the surrounding areas.
Okay, cheers, Councillor Wright. Henry, so some of, I think point 4 in the schedule of local conditions, it does say that it won't extend any further than the area that's granted. Do we need something more explicit to make Councillor Wright's point, or do you think it's made elsewhere in here?
I think the difficulty is that we're trying to focus on the area that the licence will cover, essentially. And I think in that sense, it's pretty well controlled, because there's also conditions in there requiring people to be seated at tables for the purposes of the licence in terms of eating and drinking and all the rest of it. I think the difficulty we've got is that the sort of the generic change in the licensing laws now will effectively permit off sales that go beyond the pavement licence anyway. So I think a pub that doesn't have a pavement license, people will be able to buy alcohol and go out. A pub that does have a pavement license, people will still be able to go in there and buy it and take it outside, but not use it in the pavement licensed area. So I think there is a real difficulty there. I don't think what you can do is say, if you've got a pavement license, you therefore can't go beyond it. So I think in practice, it's going to be a very difficult thing to police. I think fundamentally that will come down to, first of all, I suppose, a policing response if it came to it. And I appreciate, I don't really want to keep going back to the Strand, but that is a good example of where control sits outside of this as well. But also we do have the ability to revoke a license where it's considered to be causing antisocial behaviour issues or potentially other breaches in terms of COVID related matters. So we do have controls to say, well, actually you can't, we're going to take away your pavement license, but that still won't take away the fact that somebody can do an off license sale and then go and drink it outside the premises anyway. So I think as far as this is concerned, we need to focus on making sure that this regime and its control is as good and as strong as it can be. And we're going to have to pick up other issues like that one outside of this particular bit.
Okay, cheers, Henry. Councillor Tony Woodward.
Thank you, Chair. I fully support the recommendation. I think there's a great lot of work in a short space of time. Just a couple of points really for my clarification. And one minor point in paragraph 26 of the report, it refers to 2020 in the third line, 2021.
Sorry, paragraph 26, did you say?
Yes, of your report.
Yeah, sorry, you're quite right. That should say March, 31st of March, 2021. Beg your pardon.
But if you could clarify something around planning permission and well, maybe I just don't follow it properly, but in paragraph 24 of the report is the requirement for landowner permission, and that's flagged. And then let's say it's Devon County property, where's the onus to get that permission? Is it on us as the council or the applicant? And that just dovetails with paragraph 33 of the conditions, which says the licensee must have all planning permissions. And that seems to conflict with, well, it's section 7 of the Act, which refers that if you've got this, then planning permission is deemed to have been given. So is there a slight contradiction between asking the applicant to have the necessary permission? How does that arise if it's county council property? Will they have to apply for that, which may well take more than 7 days? And is there not deemed planning permission from the Act? In section?
Yes, so you're right. Sorry, Chair, if I may.
Yeah, go for it, Henry.
Yeah, so planning permission is deemed granted. You're absolutely right. So there's no need then to go off and seek a planning permission, temporary or otherwise, for this use. It follows the grant of the license. That is a separate issue from landowner permission. In the mainstay here, I think we were envisaging that you may have it going beyond the pavement licensed area, for example, but there will be circumstances where a landowner may not want, underlying landowner potentially, may not want it to go ahead. But I think in the mainstay, because it's going to be highways, it's not going to be an issue. Because highway, it's the right to use the highway. I think when this was first written, there was this issue of potentially overlapping with neighbouring landowner uses and so on.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, cheers, Henry. Councillor Dent, good to see you looking so well, sir.
So far, so good. You want to feel my hamstrings? I pulled yesterday.
Oh.
I'm new to this, so I've got 1 and 2. It might be idiot questions, but let me just fire away. First of all, the one is about furniture removal. I understand all the conditions. It's got to be movable. Does it have to be moved every night? The conditions being proposed say from 10 in the morning till 10 at night, which allows for, excuse me, an alarm's going off, which allows for an hour between 10 and 11 to remove furniture. Is it a condition that it has to be moved? That's one question. Second question is, regarding licenses when they're applied for, do ward members get informed of what's going on? Because we could have some quite useful background information to help the team. And therefore, will ward members be involved in the consultation process? And once a license is issued, do we know, does that get published to members of the committee? And in this case, particularly from the ward members' viewpoint, the ward members themselves. Next question is, how do the businesses who do receive licenses get monitored? Who does it? How often? And I'd also have concerns, as Tom did, about no smoking in open areas. And I can think instantly, it's not our area, but the Coat restaurant in Exeter has tables outside where there's no barrier, there's no definition of who can smoke where. It's just an open area. And I can see that cropping up in many places. So sorry about that. Several questions at once from a new boy.
No, thanks, Councillor Dent. They're all relevant and useful questions. Henry.
Can I come back on those? Can you just give me a couple of minutes to come back?
Yeah, not a problem. So we'll move on in the meantime to Councillor Fred Cahill.
Thank you, Chairman. Just unmute myself. Yeah, I've got a few questions like Councillor Dent. He did cover some of what I wanted to cover, but that's okay. You talked about furniture. I mean, in the document, the guidance document, it asks what furniture can be permitted by licence: counters or stools, tables, counters or shelves, chairs, benches or other forms of seating, umbrellas, barriers, heaters and other articles used in connection with the outdoor consumption of food or drink. So just briefly, I mean, what exactly are we going to allow all of that, or are we actually going to put provisos on what we do allow? That's the first question. Second question is how far, and I'm obviously focusing on the Exmouth area and primarily the Strand, but there is other areas that I'm going to talk about. How far does one have to be away from the establishment to establish this outside seating area? And we can talk about the Spoken issue and the Grapevine issue. Spoken have got tables and chairs right outside their establishment. There is quite a lot there, and obviously under the new regime there will probably be guidance on what they can or can't do. Grapevine being a pub, you know, a considerable way down Victoria Road, will have to put their tables and chairs wherever they get permission to locate them, and then take them back in every night, I assume. They're carrying alcohol quite a long way, or are they going to be setting up their own bar at the table and chair permission area in the Strand? Or are they actually going to physically carry the beverages that they're selling from the pub to that area? So that question is, how far can this table and chair consideration go from a licensed establishment? Because also we have another establishment on the seafront talking about a beach bar. Now, what constitutes a beach bar? Now, is that a bar on the beach, or is it a bar inside the establishment of the new building that is being built there? Because, you know, straight away, they may well be asking for a pavement license to put tables and chairs out on the main thoroughfare of Exmouth Esplanade, which runs across the front of the establishment. So that's another question thrown in the mix. Further to this, we've got this issue about highways and council land. So we've got council-owned land, and we've got highways-owned land, i.e. DCC and EDDC in the Strand, which has presented its own problems. Is this going to continue to present its own problems, or are we going to get some clear definition of who owns what, who gives permission for what? Because my next question is about an establishment that is, I understand, applying for a license for alcohol serving and consumption right on the corner of Roll Street and the Strand. Now, if they're putting tables and chairs outside their establishment as they get permission to do so, that's going to cause a further obstruction of people walking around that corner unless they're put some considerable way away from the establishment onto a green grassy area. So once again, it's about where we're going to allow these places of established tables and chairs outside licensed premises. Have I made myself clear? Correct me if I'm wrong, but please come back to me if you want some further clarification. Thank you, Chairman.
No, thank you, Councillor Cahill. I think it is a fair question. Is it okay for, and actually, Henry, you might be able to help with this. Is it okay for an establishment to have its sitting out area in a different postcode, which I believe would be the case with some of the some of those on the Strand? And also, I would imagine, Henry, that any new application for any kind of license is considered at the time, and we can't really be guessing that in the future. But I would like to add as well that last week at an antisocial behaviour Zoom about the Strand and Exmouth, I believe it was Antonia Weeks who said that we must remember as well that the Strand is for everybody, not just people who want to use establishments. So Henry, hundreds of questions.
Yes, and forgive me if I miss any. Perhaps councillors can come back if I do.
No worries.
So I think it's important to bear in mind that as we go forward through the discussion that this is specifically about dedicated highway land. This is not about other areas like beaches or sort of non-highway land that might be owned by the district council. This is specifically dedicated highway. And by that, it's not highway where traffic can pass and repass, it's effectively pedestrianised areas. So we are limiting, this is a new regime for us in relation to putting furniture in that dedicated highway area. I've got a verbal update to follow, and I think probably some conversations that might want to happen probably are more appropriate in there than they are now. But in relation to the sort of the proximity issue, so the legislation says that the table and chairs must be in connection with the premises. In connection with that, and the I think it refers to where is it? Adjacent to a relevant highway. So the premises itself has to be in close proximity to the highway, but how close that is a degree of discretion. And I think that the answer is it has to be somewhere pretty close. What you can't have is someone having I'll just take Strand because it's easy, having a license in the Strand, if you like, and then applying for something in Sidmouth. It's got to be in close proximity to their business, because otherwise it wouldn't work. But nonetheless, even within the Strand, it still has to be within the highway. If it's not within the highway, they're not going to be using pavement licenses. They're going to have to use something else. But what we can't have is a massive distance between the premises. So, but again, it's going to be a fact and degree issue. And if it's totally unworkable and impractical, then it's unlikely that a license would be granted. In terms of ward member consultation, yes, ward members are down to be consulted as part of the process. And I'm happy that ward members are notified on the grants too. There's no problem with that. Monitoring, well, fundamentally, it's likely to be street scene that will be the sort of the forefront of it, if you like. But that's really more in observing and seeing what's going on and feeding back if there are issues. And you can see that particularly in relation to litter, for example, if there are problems there. But if things are fed back from them, or indeed from ward members or members of the public, then the enforcement side of it would sit with the licensing officers predominantly. They'll be going out and they'll be seeing it, and they'll be dealing with any enforcement issues there may be. But it's almost a sort of coordinated team approach to that, probably. Frontage, proximity. So the only bit, sorry, I haven't got to yet, which I'm still just reading back through the draft conditions, is this issue of removal at night. There's no requirement that they're removed at night in a legislative sense, if you like, but I'd be very surprised if there are many who would want to leave their stuff out for fear of it being nicked, just generally speaking, because it can't be affixed into the highway as almost a permanent. They're likely to want to keep it secure, and you'll see most people put their tables and chairs back into the premises, don't they, when they close, and then bring it out again in the morning. So that's what I envisage it being. Whether we are saying you must do that, I'm just working my way back through. And perhaps
do you want me to pick that bit up?
Yes, please. If Anita can just answer that, perhaps.
Yeah, certainly. So sorry. So the Act requires the furniture to be removable, and I'm just double checking, requires it. I think I've echoed the wording from the legislation, which requires it to be removed at night. What it doesn't say is whether it has to be removed in full from the highway or whether it is sufficient for it to be stacked up in one position. So they take down all the tables, but they stack it up. So we've echoed the wording, and I think there possibly is a discussion about where things get left. It's also one of the reasons why we brought the cut-off time back to 10 p.m. The legislation allows trading up to 11. We brought it back to 10, or as may be relevant in other places. And that's partly because of the clearing up, that if you're a resident in one of those areas, the last thing you want is people moving tables around between 10 and 11. So we certainly at the moment do require it to be removed. We haven't really dealt with, does that mean to one position or into the premises? And I suspect we'll, given the Act is not specific about that, we'll take a bit of a view if it's causing an obstruction, or it's the police are always concerned about furniture being left out and being used as missiles. If that's an issue, then I suspect we'll take a view. Picking up the point about what furniture and what we will allow, and picking up bars and counters, the Act is quite broadly drafted and does allow counters. So it allows food or potentially food preparation and service areas, as well as just tables and chairs, and that's permitted within the Act. Again, we've replicated that, but we have can't look at two screens at the same time. We've refused. I think we don't allow them to cook, and we've prohibited barbecues and fire pits, I think is what's in there. So we've tried to lock it down a little bit more, because you don't really want people cooking smelly food outside, but the Act does permit it. Picking up the smoking point, I think, as Henry said, it's up to you really as members. We drafted it initially, probably being slightly rampant anti-smokers, we drafted it to prohibit smoking, because actually we've all done it. If you're a pedestrian and you're walking past, like walking into a building where people smoke outside, it's about the impact, particularly on a narrow or a narrowish area that might have on the pedestrians. So we precluded it initially. We put it in, and we have replicated the wording from the Act for the moment. But that is for members to take a different view as you wish, and then we can redraft that.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So Anita, so condition 20 deals with the removal of tables and chairs. I found it now.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Councillor Maddie Chapman is here to brighten our morning.
If she unmuted.
Councillor Maddie Chapman. Councillor Chapman, you're muted, I believe.
No, I think I'm all right now.
You are coming through loud and clear.
Okay, thank you, Chairman. I need a bit of clarity on this. I have great respect for the licensing team. They always do a wonderful job. They're always very, very helpful. My problem, I feel, is with other consultees. So Henry probably and Anita probably know where I'm going with this. I am asking them, is it right that Street Scene can actually then talk to the police when licensing have already said, right, this is what we want you to do, you follow the guidelines, and then they go to Street Scene to ask for permission, and Street Scene then goes to the police. Now, surely this is the wrong way around, that the license and the police work together, and Street Scene at the landowners, if they have no objection to their land being used, have the right to refuse it. But on the other hand, do they have the right to question other consultees? Not necessarily do I need the answer today, but I do feel this is muddying the waters And whereas the licensing staff are well up on the licensing issues and have the training, I'm not sure everyone in street scene is up to the same standard. And I think it's muddying the waters a bit, and we need a chain of command, I feel. However, that's up to other members as well. But I would like clarity on this, please.
Chair, if I may, yeah. So I think that that specific issue is quite discreet, and I think we all know what it relates to, probably for the next section. But I'm very happy to explain the circumstances around that particular issue in the next bit, because I think it'll help you understand exactly what happened. In relation to this, though, yes, it is the licensing function that are obviously responsible for it, and we are consulting these bodies with a view to ensuring that we're taking on legitimate concerns when we are determining whether or not to grant a license to have furniture in the highway. Here, street scene are simply being asked, is it something that they would have concern about, really from our landowner function, i.e. is there a conflict between other things they may be wanting nearby that may cause an issue? You know, and again, the Strand is the easy example, because there aren't that many examples where this conflict may arise. So they are nothing more than a consultee in this particular part of the process. So they won't be going off to talk to to the police. The police will be coming straight to us, as in licensing.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Councillor Jeff Pratt.
Yes, thank you. Henry, a question for you. On the application form, is there provision for the applicant to prepare a plan for the committee or for the officers?
Yes, so they are required to submit a plan showing the area that the pavement licence would cover.
Yes, so there shouldn't be any dispute then as to the extent of the area which we're dealing with.
That's correct.
Yeah, thank you.
And then the conditions all link into that plan.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. Okay, thank you, Councillor Pratt. Councillor Sarah Jackson.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, in reference to paragraph 30 under local conditions and 11 on the proposed licence terms. And I apologise, Henry, I'm sure you probably covered in your opening spiel that I missed. It does talk about plastics and recyclable plastics and polycarbonate containers. I wonder if actually we ought to be considering going a little bit further with this. We really ought to be promoting reuse rather than recycle as the priority. So I wonder if actually what we ought to be doing is asking licensees to make a commitment to reducing single-use plastic by using reusable plastic containers or other containers, rather than things that effectively go back into this cycle of recycling, which ultimately ends up in waste eventually. So I would quite like to hear the other committee members' thoughts on that, because I think we will probably strengthen that a little bit. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Jackson. Henry, a couple of people have asked me previously to this. Is there any way that we can almost incentivise that in terms of, I don't know, possibly a reduction in the licence fee, or because we can encourage businesses to use reusable plastics, but we can't force them, I would imagine, at this late stage. So is there any way that we can write that into this so that it's more likely to happen?
So my issue, I suppose my concern about the flexibility in the fee, which is effectively what you would be proposing there, is that you don't know the certainty that will actually come to pass unless you impose it by condition anyway. But secondly, the concern over the council then whether it can resource its responsibilities under the Act in terms of doing it. We don't know quite where we're going to go. £100 is actually relatively low compared to the fee that they are were subject to. So for my mind, I think there's something that there is certainly scope to look at that going forward. At this moment in time, obviously bearing in mind that we're at crisis point now to get it in. I'm concerned about just thinking that through. to my mind, and I think Councillor Jackson's absolutely right, it comes down to whether you say recyclable or reusable. And I think reusable is a perfectly acceptable thing to say there, because it's not really in there. If you were to permit glasses out there, there's a clear health and safety, stroke, antisocial behaviour risk, isn't there? And I think most, and also for the licence holders, the risk that they just go walking off. It's very easy for glasses to go walking, particularly when they're already outside. So to my mind, it's probably in their interest to make sure that they're only using sort of, dare I say, cheaper receptacles outside. So to me, there's already a degree of incentive there. Otherwise, I'm going to have to keep buying glasses all the time or get new glasses. So I think if you were to say reusable, I think that covers it off, and I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing for the council to decide to do if it wants to do it, rather than using the word recyclable.
Okay, thank you, Henry. So would it be the right thing to do now, Henry, to ask Councillor Jackson if she wishes to propose that as an amendment to it?
Well,
or is that something?
I wonder whether you go through it, and it might be we just have a discussion at the end. Say, is the committee going to be generally happy with that? And if we are, I'll take it on board and amend the conditions. But we take the recommendations on block. So if there are any others that members may wish to deal with, but I'll certainly flag it to make sure we deal with it before the vote. If that's okay with you, Chair.
Yeah, that's fine. Thanks, Henry. Okay, Councillor Fred Cahill. Again, yeah, I think you want to come back.
Yes, I did. Thank you. Yeah, I'm still not 100% sure that I clearly understood the difference about highway and East Devon District Council owned land. And if I could point this question at Henry, you referred to the highway throughout. I'm led to believe that parts of the Strand, and we're talking about the Strand because the parts of the Strand are designated as highway, and other parts are designated belonging to East Devon District Council. Is that correct, Henry?
Yeah. Yes, that's correct.
So when you talk about highway, I'm assuming you're talking about the bit of land that was designated as Devon County Council highway, and even when the Strand was pedestrianised, it still remained a highway. Now, the reason I'm about asking this question is because para 7.4 in the guidance notes of the government document asks, who must local authorities consult? The local authority must consult the Highways Authority. If they are not the Highways Authority, this is usually the County Council in a 2T area. Now, can you clarify that for me? Because once again, highway is highway, our land is our land. Is that correct?
Yes, that's
so
correct.
Who are we going to consult if these people want to put tables and chairs on the highway?
Yes. So if we sort of step back a sec, so if you just visualize, I don't know the exact area in the Strand, but if you just took the Strand, you could just for the sake of convenience, just draw a line across it, and you could say half of that is dedicated highway land, half of it isn't. So this licensing would only apply to the half that is highway. Now, in that sense, we have to consult with the Highway Authority. So in fact, I've had an email in this morning from Devon County saying this is the mailbox that the consultation has to go to. So yes, we will consult the Highway Authority, and we will expect a response from them. Whether we get one or not, who knows? But we will give them the opportunity to consult. If it's on the other half, this regime doesn't apply. Simple as that. It's effectively just a landowner permission to use the land for a particular purpose, which is dealt with separately. So we're only talking about that half of the, and it's not half, I appreciate it's going to be funny lines, isn't it? But it's that half of the Strand that is highway in legal terms that this regime will apply to.
Can I just come back to you, Henry? Do we have a clear, definitive, illustrative map of what belongs to the district council and what belongs to the highway?
Funny you should ask. So we have a definitive map of what belongs to us. We are just trying to get a definitive map on the highway bit. We're pretty sure we know what it is, but what we want to make sure is that highways and county tell us that is the area of the highway to which this regime will apply. And I have to say, so far, it's unique to the Strand that this conversation is arising. Outside of that, we're pretty happy. But
okay, but
we're on.
It's not just the Strand, Henry. It's also the Magnolia Centre. So if they're drawing up any map, or if you're consulting with the county council and drawing up any definitive map, can we make sure that it covers the Magnolia Centre as well, and any other contentious areas, please?
Yes, so we as officers will make sure we understand what is the highway and what isn't.
Thank you.
I think in terms of some other issues, Henry, that would be quite useful for Exmouth as well.
Yeah.
Thank you, Councillor Cahill. Councillor Nick Hookway. Good morning, Nick.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning to everybody. Yeah, I'd just like to raise the issue about litter and just get some clarification, really, because looking through the recommendations, I've come upon paragraph 33, which talks about street scene having a sort of an overview and looking at the management and of the space and the impact upon litter and the impact of the collection of waste and street bins. And I just wanted to have some clarification. Are we expecting that when the licensee clears away their tables and chairs and beer barrels as boundaries or whatever, are they expected to clear away any litter as well, or will the street scene operatives, the council, deal with the litter? That's my question. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you,
Thank you.
Councillor.
I can cover that then. So condition 17 says the licensee must ensure that it provides an outside lidded refuse bin to enable refuse generated within the outside area, that's the plan area, to be easily, licensed area, to be easily deposited. The refuse collected in this refuse bin must be disposed of by the licensee at the expense of the licensee. So there is no suggestion that it becomes an EDDC cost in terms of trying to clear up the refuse and litter from anybody or relying on a license. And obviously, if litter becomes an issue, then that's one of the grounds that we can look to take action under the conditions, and also then revoke if they don't follow.
Okay, thanks so much for that.
Thank you, Henry. Thank you, Councillor Hookway. Councillor Alan Dent.
Yeah, just a quickie backing up what Sarah Jackson was saying, that I'm a supporter of Exeter Chiefs, and a couple of years ago when they started issuing drinks in disposable mugs, you take them on the terrace, they found that the problem of clearing up afterwards was expensive, basically, because people would leave them lying under the seats and the terraces. They would use them they'd drop them off in bags, but the club had to go and pick up all the recyclable, the single-use plastic. So instead, and after that, the club introduced a reusable plastic container, a much more substantial one, and you get charged £1 for every one of those you use. And you can take them to either recycling stations or the bar or wherever it is where you bought it after you've had your drink and get your money back. And that encourages the users, the drinkers, to clear up after themselves. And my suggestion would be, Sarah, that we somehow use the phrase encourage reuse, because I entirely agree with you. It's better than recycling, but it's not enforceable commercially. It could make a lot of sense, but people have to realise that for themselves. So my suggestion would be that we use the phrase encourage the use of reusable containers. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Dent. Well, conveniently, Councillor Jackson is next with our hand up. So if you'd like to come back on that, Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, and a couple of points. I'll respond to Councillor Dent first and ask Henry, is it enforceable that we can make it reusable rather than just encourage it? I would have thought at this point in time we could make that a condition that they have to use reusable over recyclable. We have made a commitment to this, so I think it's important that we follow that through. But Henry, if you could reply to that, and then I'll come back on the other point.
Yes, I said it. I think it's perfectly acceptable. I mean, the local conditions are what the local authority considers to be acceptable in the circumstances. And bearing in mind we have signed the Declaration Against the Use of Single-Use Plastics, I think it's fine for the council to say they shall be served in reusable plastic polycarbonate containers. How the licensee then deals with that is ultimately a matter for them, whether they incentivize it through deposit schemes or whatever it happens to be. I think it's also it is important to bear in mind that this is about facilitating sitting out and eating and drinking. This is not mass gathering type like Exeter Chiefs or a concert or anything like that. This is about businesses having the opportunity to put tables and chairs out to expand their business opportunity. So I think one shouldn't get too hung up on it in the sense, because I don't think it should be too difficult getting a few polycarbonate receptacles to have outside. How you would deal with that if you're eating and drinking in the deposit scheme sense, I'm not entirely sure. But nonetheless, the key thing really is about not having glasses outside because of the risk to health and safety and antisocial behaviour. So to me, that's the key message that comes through that condition. Whether or not you want to be slightly more draconian in terms of reusing plastics, then that's for the council. But I do think it's perfectly acceptable for the council to say, yes, reuse rather than recycle.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Councillor Jackson.
Yeah, brilliant. The only other point was picking up on Councillor Hookway's point around litter in the area. Obviously, point 17, as you've quite rightly stated, has insisted that a bin is provided. I'm very aware, though, having been to lots of seafront towns where they've got areas that are frequented by customers that sit outside, there's often a lot of other litter that accumulates there from people who've bought something in the local shop or napkins, that sort of thing. And I just wonder whether that just needs to be strengthened slightly to ensure that anything that's left in that area, the tables and chairs area that is being used and operated by a premises, that they understand they're responsible for getting the refuse from that area when it hasn't been put in the bin by customers to the bin. Because at the moment, the commitment is only to empty the bin, as far as I can read.
Oh, sorry, Chair, if I may. So there are actually, there are two other conditions as well, 18 and 19, which also cover this, which does say that licensees must not dispose of litter in bins provided by East Devon. All waste from the licensed operations must be disposed of at the expense of the licensee. And then 19 also covers sort of a routine inspection of areas outside the licensed areas to make sure it's kept clean and tidy. Must be removed frequently throughout the day, and again, entertaining events and so on. So there are quite strong conditions there to deal with that. But there's not going to be a perfect world. There will always be the odd case. It's a question of how bad it becomes, in a sense. If it really is problematic rather than an occasional breach, then the council would have to consider whether it's acceptable for that licensee to carry on. And if they can't adhere to the conditions and they can't enforce them amongst themselves and follow them, then it's perfectly permissible for the council to say, you can't follow your conditions. If you can't meet them, we're going to take your licence away. And if they carry on, take it away. It's up to them fundamentally to comply with the conditions that are imposed. But from my perspective, I think those conditions are pretty strong in terms of litter control. Actually, what it comes down to is, in practice, does it work?
That's lovely. Thank you, Henry.
Henry, can I just add number 8 as well, picks up that the outside area has to be suitably managed by competent staff to control the use of the area, to return trays, clear crockery and refuse, and to maintain the area as high a standard as is required. We could potentially beef that up, but I think in conjunction with the other provisions, I think, as Henry says, it's probably there.
Cheers, thank you very much. And I think, as Henry says, we always have the option to go back and review something if people aren't complying or things become with it, or things become a significant issue.
Chair, if I might add as well, that is also the reason that our intention is to issue these until the end of March next year. And
Absolutely.
If we discover that some of these conditions don't quite work, need to be tweaked, then that's exactly the purpose of that. So for the second season, we can review anything that just hasn't worked as we intended.
Okay, that's great. Thanks for that clarification. The final person from the committee that has a hand up is Councillor Kim Bloxham, my deputy.
Thank you, Chair. Henry, do we have any idea of the number of applications that are waiting to be processed?
No, no is the simple answer. All I've heard essentially is that county had a massive spike in them as this became became known. And the email this morning suggested that county themselves are now are holding off, and they're waiting for districts to tell them whose responsibility it is to be able to palm them off and hand them over. So I honestly don't have an indication, but we can expect quite a few, I think, and if what county you've experienced is that could be quite high numbers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Blackson. Okay, so we just have Paul Miller would like to speak again. He's from outside the committee, but everybody else has done. So, Councillor Miller, if you keep your point brief, but
I'll try very much so.
Thank you very much.
I just wanted to refer the committee to the motion which was passed back in October last year, Councillor Bickley's motion, which Council approved. One of the clauses in that motion was that EDDC promote the message in its reduce and refill rather than focusing on recycle. So I really hope the committee can move some kind of amendment. And I just wanted also to endorse Councillor Dent's excellent point about a deposit return scheme. I mean, that kind of thing is happening in other countries, and actually I believe this country will be legislating quite soon to make it mandatory anyway. So I'm just wondering whether it wouldn't be too draconian to put that as a condition that every business that has these outside spaces should introduce its own deposit return scheme, so we can ensure that the potential litter problem that Councillor Hookway identified is prevented as much as possible.
Thank you, Councillor Miller. Henry?
Yeah, so I'm very wary about mandating that they must do a deposit scheme. I mean, to me, it seems a sort of a commercial imperative on their part that they make it work and that people don't nick don't nick the polycarbonate. This is not quite so trendy to say that, is it? They don't nick the polycarbonate receptacle. I think if they want to make sure that they don't go walkies, that's what they will do. To me, from the licensing aspect, if you like, I think it's down to whether you say reusable plastic polycarbonate or whether you use recyclable. How they then put that into practice is really a matter for them, subject to any subsequent legislation that they may come forward imposing it. I don't think it's right for these conditions to deal with it, but I do think you can say reusable if you would rather than recyclable. I think that's a perfectly acceptable thing to do.
Do you think, Henry, there's any scope for maybe the council putting out some sort of press release encouraging that and just nudging people in that direction rather than an imposition?
Of course, yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, it would be an imposition in the conditions to say that they must use reusable plastic polycarbonate containers. So you achieve the goal, but what you don't do is mandate how they deal with it.
Yeah.
So, you know, in terms of a press release from the council, and I mean, presumably, Chair, we'd have to think whether it comes from you or whether it comes from the administration, if you like. But yes, absolutely, a press release to say that this is now in place, and one of the key conditions is the reusable plastic polycarbonate outside the premises. I think that's absolutely fine.
And you may wish to consider a deposit return scheme.
And you may wish to consider a deposit return scheme, yes.
Okay, well, we have two more people from inside the committee, and then after that, we're going to have to move on to the vote, I would imagine. Councillor Chapman.
Thank you, Chairman. I think if my memory serves me correct, that the licensing team always put on the license for takeaways and outside areas that also the licensee has to maintain the pavement. So if food, drink, anything is spilt, they have to make sure the pavement is non-greasy and cleaned and maintained at all times, which I think will please Councillor Hookway.
Thank you very much, Councillor Chapman. Councillor Dent.
Just a quickie technical one. I've recently bought some outside glasses from Lakeland, and they're actually made of acrylic. And if we go on saying polycarbonate, are we defining things too closely? What Lakeland claim is that these are durable and shatterproof. That's probably, they're also highly reusable, and that's probably the point, that they're shatterproof and they're reusable. Thank you, Chairman.
I think if we say something other than non-glass reusable.
Yeah, quite. I get the sort of fairly clear steer from the committee that you probably want to use the word reusable rather than recyclable, and perhaps, I mean, the delegated authority is there to tweak the local conditions anyway. But if you're happy, then leave condition 11 for me to just tweak whether we use plastic, polycarbonate, make sure that's an appropriate catch-all expression, just to make clear that it's not glass or bottles that should be out there, but that whatever is out there, it should be reusable.
Okay, thank you very much, Henry. I am certainly happy for you to go away and do that. I would imagine the committee is, because there's no blue hands shooting up when you say that. Councillor Fred Cahill.
Thank you, Chairman. Just one last thing. It may have already been covered and I might have missed it, but when the street scene give licenses to events on the Strand, such as, you know, the Armed Forces Day or Hospice Care Day or organ donation day or whatever it may be, how is that going to interact with the pavement people having a license to use the space that is normally used by the people who have these big open air fetes and activities? How's that interaction going to work?
Yes, so that's the mainstay of the reason with for the consultation with Street Scene, is to make sure that anybody who is applying for a pavement license is not going to block or prevent a well-planned event or a well-known event. There's always going to be some degree of tension, I suppose, between what is more of a long-term thing and a short-term use of land, but the idea is to try and minimise any potential for that kind of conflict. And the Street Scene team are acutely alive to the use of the Strand for some of those events. And as I say, that's the purpose for consulting them in terms of any pavement licenses that might come forward.
Okay, thank you, Henry. Okay, so I think it might be time to have a vote. Do we have a proposer for this? Bearing in mind that Henry will change the paragraph 11 to reusable rather than recyclable, and just make sure that that's watertight. So yeah, Henry, do you want to?
Could I just add something to pick up from picking up from Councillor Chapman's point about greasy pavements? I'm not sure we pick that up. We pick up clearing up. I'm not sure we necessarily pick up cleaning up. I think that might be quite a good point. And if committee are happy, that's something we can just draft in to just make sure it's very clear that this includes cleaning up and degreasing if necessary.
Okay, thank you very much. So Henry, what are our next, what do we do now? Do we have a proposer?
So you're quite right. You need to have a proposer and a seconder. In terms of what goes forward, if you want to get that off the table, then I can just clarify it before the vote.
I'm quite happy to propose that.
I'll second it.
Councillor Bloxham.
Oh, I think that was Councillor Jackson said she'd propose, and I'm happy to second.
Okay, thank you very much. Henry, are we doing this with the red and green ticks, or did you decide we are going to do it that way?
If you're happy, Chair, I think probably using the green and the green tick, red cross is best. So there is proposed and seconded that the recommendations as detailed in the report are agreed, and that is with a couple of tweaks, that the local conditions are, condition 11 particularly, is reshaped to use the word reusable, and also that it's watertight, I think, using the Chair's expression, and also that we pick up clean up and degreasing in the conditions as well. Subject to that, though, the conditions are as written. So if members can, for those who are in agreement, if you can tick green yes. For those who are not in agreement, if you can press red no. So if you'd like to cast your votes, please. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I'm sorry, just not again, I went too fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So that's 12 in favour, and there is 1 against. So, Chair, that's carried.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you everybody for your votes. So now we move on to agenda item 8, which will be a verbal update on the relaxation of the licensing regime under the Business and Planning Act 2020. And the star of the show today, as always, is Henry.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, so members, I thought it was probably just important just to give you a very, very brief update on this relaxation. So, I mean, it is a big relaxation. I mean, essentially, anybody who has an on license currently is now permitted to have an off license as well, to trade by selling off the premises in very similar terms to their on license. licensing is not a particularly easy regime, but fundamentally this is a significant relaxation. Now, it is effective now, and so all on-licensed premises or those who have a hybrid license are enabled to sell alcohol off the premises as they wish in accordance with their licensing hours. What the legislation does, however, is it permits the responsible authorities, of which there are 8, most of them are prescribed, but the last one is a sort of a wide catch-all in terms of residents or those affected. It permits people to request a review of the licensing authority for those premises that now have this wider or increased flexibility. What that review does is it requires the licensing authority to, within 48 hours, take a decision on whether or not it wants to impose interim measures in terms of trying to control it, and it must carry out a full review within 28 days. There's more sort of subtlety about that in particular, which I won't go into unless members wish me to, not least obviously we're still trying to get to grips with it ourselves. But the key thing to take away from this is that neither the interim review or the full review can be delegated beyond the committee. It is the responsibility of the Licensing Enforcement Committee, the subcommittee, to decide whether there should be interim measures within 48 hours and then to carry out the full review within the 28 days. So I simply flag up that potentially over the coming weeks that we as an authority may end up in a situation of being asked to review premises that now have off sales where they didn't before, from the perspective of antisocial behaviour or whatever it may be. And you can imagine, and dare I say at the Strand, but you can imagine that in the Strand that could be a sort of an acute example of this. So all I wanted to flag up is the subcommittee is 3 members. There's training this week, I think it's on Wednesday, I think Councillor Jeffrey pointed out to me. But once members are trained, then we will be having to call subcommittees to deal with these reviews if we get them. So there may be quite an onus on the membership of this committee to be sort of available and taking decisions on a fairly routine basis going forward. Now, that is worst case scenario. We know the police are stretched. We know there's a lot of pressure on responsible authorities. It may not come to pass. It may be all hunky-dory and it never, we don't have to do one. But I simply flag it up that there is a risk of the subcommittee being drawn into quite a lot of work over the coming weeks if sort of increased drinking and problems associated come to pass. So that was it really, Chair. I just wanted to sort of highlight that, but I'm very happy to have a conversation. And as I said earlier, if there is a desire to just touch on the Exmouth Strand issue, then I'm happy to sort of help explain what happened there.
I haven't talked about that a lot recently, Henry, so I'm happy to talk a little bit more about it. We do have a question from Councillor Tom Wright.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for that, Henry. I have concerns because that's largely was one of my jobs, but to be real, I've had friends who live in Exmouth tell me that one of the problems of drinking on the beach and things is not people buying booze from on licenses, but in fact people go into the various shops in Exmouth, Bargain Booze, Budgeons and the Tesco's Express, and buying armfuls of beer and taking that to drink outside. So I actually don't think that extending the right of on licenses to sell for off license should have much of an impact, because in actual fact, if we were to look at our licenses, I would guess that there are very few, if any, on licenses who don't have the facility to sell bottles for consumption off the premises. So I think in the real life, it's the supermarkets and corner booze shops and convenience stores that mainly affect the consumption of alcohol in our public spaces. I think there's lots of evidence to say that when we've had troubles in the Strand before, it's been a succession of people going to Bargain Booze on the corner there in the Strand and buying it. So I don't think we need to be overly concerned.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. I think it's fair to say that a bottle of beer in a pub, whether on or off sales, is going to be a lot more expensive than probably than 4 cans of whatever in Bargain Booze. Do you have any more questions at all? Okay. Do we have anybody from outside the committee who wishes to speak? Doesn't look like it. Okay, so I believe, Henry, we're done now.
Yes, that was just a note, and I really hope that Councillor Wright is right. You know, I do accept that, and actually perhaps the Strand is the greatest example for that, but there may be others. So I really do hope it doesn't come to pass, and that we can all just carry on, and you know, there are no problems. But I thought it best to highlight it.
Okay, cheers, Henry, and thank you everybody else, because that brings our meeting to an end. I'd like to thank everyone, including any members of the public watching online, for taking part. However, can I just remind all those present that the supporting officer will confirm when the meeting is no longer being recorded or going live. And until then, your comments and any words you say will be live to the public. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Chair. Well done, Chair.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you for the first meeting. Bye.
Thank you very much.